Elias Thorne, a wisp of a boy barely 8 years old, found solace in the muted greens and dappled light of Whisperwood. His world, in truth, was often a silent one, punctuated only by the rhythmic thrum of the old Massey Ferguson tractor from the fields or the distant, almost musical clanging of metal from his father's workshop. Their farm, a sprawling yet isolated patch of land in rural Vermont, hugged the edge of the vast, ancient forest, a silent, looming presence that stretched for miles. For Elias, the woods were both sanctuary and source of endless wonder, a stark contrast to the quiet, often overlooked existence he led within the walls of their farmhouse. Dinner, like most evenings, was a study in quiet efficiency. His mother, Sarah, a woman whose hands were perpetually stained with earth or oil, moved with a practiced grace from stove to table, placing down a simple but hearty meal of roasted chicken and vegetables. His father, David, a man of broad shoulders and few words, was already seated, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the window, likely calculating yields or pondering the next repair. The only sounds were the clink of silverware against ceramic plates and the occasional sigh of the wind as it worried the eaves of the old house. Elias sat at his usual spot, directly across from his parents, his small frame almost swallowed by the sturdy oak chair. He picked at his food, pushing a stray pea around his plate with his fork, his eyes drifting towards the window that overlooked the darkening expanse of Whisperwood. Tonight, the trees seemed to writhe, their branches casting long, skeletal shadows that danced and twisted in the faint moonlight, taking on forms that whispered of forgotten tales and ancient fears. He shivered, despite the warmth of the kitchen, a prickle of unease tracing its way up his spine. His parents, meanwhile, were lost in their own worlds. Sarah, her brow furrowed, recounted a problem with the irrigation system, her voice a low murmur. David grunted in response, offering a solution in curt, clipped phrases. They spoke of crops, of weather, of machinery, the very bedrock of their lives, but rarely of Elias, or the fantastical worlds he often retreated into. It wasn't malice, Elias knew. It was just busyness, an all-consuming practical reality that left little room for the whispers of a child's imagination. He often wondered if they even saw him, truly saw the boy who felt the heartbeat of the forest beneath his small, sturdy boots. One crisp autumn afternoon, a few days after the unsettling shadows at dinner, Elias embarked on one of his solitary expeditions into Whisperwood. He had a favorite spot, a clearing bathed in golden light where a gnarled old oak, scarred by lightning, stood sentinel. It was there he found it, a robin chick, no bigger than his thumb, lying motionless beneath the tree, a tiny featherless bundle of sorrow. It must have fallen from a nest high above, dislodged by a sudden gust of wind. Its fragile wings trembled almost imperceptibly, and a faint, pained peep escaped its tiny beak. Elias's heart, a wellspring of empathy that often went unnoticed, ached. He knelt. His small hands, usually grubby from play, became impossibly gentle as he cupped them around the helpless creature. He peered up into the vast, leafy canopy, trying to locate the nest, a futile endeavor. He knew, instinctively, that leaving it there meant certain death. A predator, perhaps a prowling fox or a hungry hawk, would find it soon. He couldn't allow that. He carefully scooped the chick into his cupped palms, feeling the faint flutter of its tiny heart against his skin. It was so small, so vulnerable. He murmured to it, words that weren't quite English, a soft, soothing stream of sounds that seemed to resonate with the trembling bird. Shh, little one. It's okay. You'll be safe. He carried it back to the farmhouse, moving with a quiet urgency, his usual meandering pace forgotten. Back in his room, a small, cluttered space filled with forgotten toys and stacks of nature books, Elias set about creating a makeshift nest. He found an old shoebox, lined it with soft cotton from a discarded shirt, and gently placed the chick inside. He then spent the next hour meticulously searching for earthworms and crushed berries, feeding the tiny bird with the tip of a twig. His brow furrowed in concentration. He whispered to it constantly, not just words of comfort, but what almost sounded like instructions, soft intonations and quiet hums that seemed to calm the distressed creature. It was a peculiar habit, one he'd had since he was very young. A silent conversation with the creatures of the wild that his parents, had they ever witnessed it, would have simply dismissed as childish make-believe. After several days of painstaking care, the robin chick, now noticeably stronger, began to chirp with more vigor. Elias knew it was time. He carried the shoebox back to the old oak, his steps light with anticipation. He climbed the lower branches, surprisingly nimble for his age, until he found a suitable crevice in the tree's bark, a shallow indentation that would serve as a temporary nest. He gently placed the chick inside, offering one last soft murmur of encouragement. "Fly free, little friend. The sky is waiting." He watched, a lump forming in his throat, as the small bird hopped out, flapped its nascent wings, and with a surprisingly strong surge, launched itself into the air, fluttering clumsily but purposefully towards the distant canopy. A wave of profound satisfaction washed over Elias. It was a small act, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it affirmed something deep within him, his connection to the natural world, and his innate desire to protect it. This was his save the cat moment, a quiet testament to the purity and kindness of his spirit, ensuring that anyone who saw him would root for this small, empathetic boy. As he descended from the tree, a sense of quiet triumph settling over him. Elias paused, his gaze drawn to something unsettling. The ground beneath the ancient oak, usually soft with decaying leaves and rich earth, was disturbed, not by the scuffle of a squirrel or the tracks of a deer. These were different, larger, deeper. They were unlike any animal print he'd ever seen in his extensive explorations of Whisperwood. They were too heavy, too deliberate. A faint, almost imperceptible scent hung in the air, musky and wild, yet not quite familiar. It was the scent of something powerful, something other. Elias's internal compass, usually so attuned to the harmonious rhythms of the forest, wavered. He felt a shift, a subtle disharmony in the familiar symphony of rustling leaves and chirping birds. He knelt, tracing the outline of one of the massive prints with his finger. It wasn't a bear. He knew bear tracks well. Nor was it a large dog, as his father often suggested when Elias spoke of strange things in the woods. This was something bigger, something with a strange, almost feline grace to its immense weight. A prickle of unease, far more potent than the fleeting shiver at dinner, crept over him. It wasn't the comforting mystery of a hidden den or a rare bird. This was different. This felt predatory. He had often spoken to his parents about the things he saw and heard in the woods, the way the wind sang through the oldest pines, the secret paths of the deer, the chattering conversations of the squirrels, and of late, he had started to mention the monster, not a terrifying, fire-breathing beast of fairy tales, but a shadowy presence, a feeling, a deep thrumming vibration that occasionally reverberated through the very earth beneath his feet. He described the strange sounds, low growls that seemed to vibrate through his bones, and the fleeting glimpses of movement, too fast and too large to be a deer or a coyote. His parents, however, always met these pronouncements with a dismissive wave of the hand or a patronizing smile. "Just your imagination running wild, Elias," his mother would say, her eyes already drifting back to her endless to-do list. "There's nothing out there but a few stray bobcats or perhaps a very big bear." His father would grunt, never quite looking up from the intricate gears of a broken engine. They dismissed his vivid descriptions of enormous clawed footprints, the strange, musky scent that sometimes wafted from the deeper parts of the woods, and especially the deep, resonant growls that, to Elias's sensitive ears, sounded utterly unlike anything he'd ever heard from a native animal. They attributed it all to an overactive imagination, a child's natural inclination to dramatize the unknown. Elias, in turn, learned to keep these observations to himself, the secret knowledge of the forest becoming a quiet burden he carried alone. He knew what he felt, what he heard, and what he saw. And it was more, much more, than just a big bear. The mystery deepened. Sometimes, in the dead of night, Elias would be jolted awake by a sound that made his small heart pound against his ribs, a deep, guttural roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the old farmhouse. It was a sound that belonged to the wild, to untamed ancient forces. He would creep to his window, peering into the inky blackness of Whisperwood, trying to pierce the veil of shadows. He never saw anything specific, only the ominous sway of the tree branches, as if something immense had just passed through them. He kept a small, worn notebook hidden under his bed, filled with crude drawings of the tracks, meticulous notes on the odd sounds, and attempts to sketch the fleeting, shadowy figures he sometimes glimpsed. He often felt a strange, almost magnetic pull towards the deeper parts of Whisperwood, a simultaneous fear and fascination that tugged at him. This monster, whatever it was becoming more than just a figment of his imagination. It was a presence, a growing certainty, a silent, powerful force lurking just beyond the edge of his understanding. A seed of curiosity planted deep within his soul, waiting for the perfect conditions to sprout and reveal its true, astonishing nature. And in the quiet solitude of his young life, the fear he harbored was slowly, inexorably, beginning to morph into something else entirely. The unsettling feeling that had been a faint whisper in Elias's mind began to solidify into a tangible dread. It was no longer just the vague shadows at dinner or the strange prints beneath the old oak. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, a taut silence replacing the familiar symphony of chirps and rustles. The air, usually fresh and clean, now carried a subtle, musky undertone, something wild and untamed that pricked at Elias's senses. His parents, oblivious in their world of harvests and repairs, remained steadfast in their dismissal, their cheerful ignorance a stark contrast to the growing certainty in Elias's small heart. One particularly blustery Tuesday evening, as the last vestiges of twilight bled from the sky, Elias was curled up by his window, trying to decipher the cryptic squiggles in his nature journal. A sudden, earth-shaking sound ripped through the stillness, a deep, resonant roar that vibrated through the glass pane, through the very floorboards beneath him, and straight into his bones. It was not the howl of a coyote, nor the grunt of a wild boar. It was something primal, a sound so potent it felt like the very air was tearing. He gasped, pressing his face closer to the window, his breath misting the cool glass. The trees at the edge of Whisperwood, usually a solid, unmoving wall, seemed to ripple and sway with an unseen force, as if something immense had just crashed through them. The roar faded into a low, guttural rumble, a sound that promised immense power held barely in check. Sleep was impossible after that. Elias lay awake, his senses on high alert, listening to the night. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside, sounded amplified, ominous. He imagined colossal paws padding silently through the undergrowth, massive eyes gleaming in the dark. The monster wasn't just a feeling anymore. It had a voice, a terrifying, unforgettable voice. The next morning, Elias felt compelled to investigate. His parents were already out in the fields, the drone of the tractor a distant hum. Slipping out the back door, he headed directly for the spot where the roar seemed to have originated. The air grew heavier, the musky scent more pronounced, a thick, wild aroma that made the hair on his arms stand on end. He moved cautiously, his small feet crunching on fallen leaves, his eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. Then he saw them, not one, but a series of enormous paw prints, pressed deep into the damp earth, leading away from the edge of their property and deeper into the forest. Each print was easily twice the size of his own hand, with distinct sharp claw marks at the end of each toe. They were utterly, unequivocally, unlike anything he had ever seen. He knelt, his fingers tracing the outline of one, feeling the cold, damp soil. This wasn't a bear. The pads were too distinct, the shape too elongated. This was feline, a truly colossal feline. He followed the trail of prints, a mixture of terror and an almost irresistible curiosity pulling him forward. He found a young sapling, its bark gouged and shredded by what could only have been massive claws. Further on, a patch of underbrush was flattened, as if something incredibly heavy had rested there. And then, the ultimate confirmation, a thick, coarse strand of orange and black fur, caught on a thorny bush, shimmering faintly in the morning sun. It was unmistakably the fur of a big cat, but one far larger and more vibrant than any housecat or bobcat. It was the fur of a tiger. Elias gasped, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. A tiger. In Whisperwood, it was an impossibility, a creature from another continent, from distant zoos and wild documentaries. Yet, the evidence was undeniable, tangible, terrifyingly real. He raced back to the farmhouse, his heart hammering against his ribs, clutching the strand of fur like a precious, horrifying artifact. Bursting into the kitchen, where his mother was preparing lunch, he blurted out, Mom, you won't believe it. It's a monster, but it's real. I found its tracks, and its fur. It's a giant cat, a tiger." Sarah Thorne, her hands covered in flour from kneading dough, turned slowly, a tired smile playing on her lips. "Oh, Elias. Darling, not the monster stories again. Didn't we talk about this? It's probably just Mr. Henderson's new German Shepherd. Or maybe a really big coyote. They can make quite a ruckus." She reached out, attempting to ruffle his hair. But Elias dodged her hand, holding out the fur. "No. Mom. Look, it's orange and black, and the tracks are huge. It roared last night, a really loud roar. It shook the house." His voice was high-pitched with urgency, trembling with the weight of his discovery. Sarah peered at the fur, her expression shifting from dismissive amusement to mild concern. That's certainly exotic-looking," she admitted, picking at a tiny speck of dough on her apron. "But honey, a tiger. Out here that's just not possible. Tigers live in jungles, or circuses, and there hasn't been a circus within 100 miles of here in years." She offered a reassuring, yet utterly disbelieving smile. "You've got a wonderful imagination, Elias. Really, you do. But sometimes it runs away with you." Later that evening, as David sat hunched over the workbench in his garage, attempting to coax life back into a broken engine, Elias tried again. He presented the fur, the meticulously drawn sketches of the paw prints, and recounted the terrifying roar with fervent conviction. David, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, barely glanced up. "Elias? Son," he rumbled, his voice heavy with a day's labor. "We've been through this. It's a farm. We have wild animals. Bears, coyotes, maybe a large stray dog. Your mother and I understand you like to play in the woods, but you can't let your imagination get the best of you. There are no tigers in Vermont. Now, run along. I've got to get this engine running by morning." He waved him off, his gaze returning to the stubborn machinery. Elias's shoulders slumped. The dismissal stung, a familiar dull ache in his chest. They didn't just disbelieve him, they actively undermined his perception of reality, chalking up his keen observations to childish fantasy. It was as if they saw only a fragment of him, the quiet, imaginative boy, but failed to see the keen observer, the intuitive listener, the child who truly felt the pulse of the wild. He retreated, the strand of tiger fur clutched in his hand, the weight of his secret knowledge pressing down on him. They wouldn't listen. They wouldn't believe. A new feeling began to stir within him, an uncomfortable mix of fear and defiance. The monster was real, and his parents, in their stubborn practicality, were willfully blind to it. This realization fueled a subtle shift within Elias. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now laced with a strange, almost exhilarating sense of purpose. If no one else would acknowledge the danger, then he would. He had to understand what was lurking in the depths of Whisperwood. Driven by this new imperative, Elias began to spend even more time in the woods, though with a newfound caution. He moved like a ghost, his small body weaving through the trees, his eyes constantly scanning, his ears straining for any sound. He left small offerings of food, a piece of leftover chicken, a handful of berries, near the massive prints he continued to find, a strange, subconscious attempt to appease the unseen beast, or perhaps to simply understand it. He learned to read the subtle signs of the forest, the sudden stillness of birds, the frantic scurry of squirrels, the abrupt silence that often preceded a shift in the air. A presence. One chilly afternoon, as he ventured deeper than he ever had before, following a particularly fresh set of tracks, he felt a sudden, electrifying jolt. The air grew heavy, the scent of the wild overwhelming. He froze, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The tracks led to a small, secluded clearing, shrouded by thick, ancient pines. He crept forward, every nerve ending screaming at him to retreat. Yet an inexplicable pull, a strange magnetic force, urged him onward. He peered through a tangle of bushes, his eyes widening in disbelief. Then, in pure, unadulterated terror, there, in the center of the clearing, was the source of the prince. The roars, the terror that had haunted his nights. It was immense, far larger than he could have ever imagined. A majestic creature, its coat a breathtaking tapestry of vibrant orange and stark black stripes, lay slumped against the base of an ancient oak. Its eyes, the color of molten gold, were half closed, glazed with what looked like pain and exhaustion. Its breath came in ragged gasps, and a raw, angry gash marred its flank, seeping dark blood into the fallen leaves. It was undeniably a tiger, a magnificent, terrifying beast, but one that was clearly injured, weak, and vulnerable. Elias, frozen in place, watched as the tiger shifted, a low groan rumbling in its chest. Its tail twitched weakly. It lifted its massive head, its golden eyes, clouded with pain, scanning the clearing. They swept over Elias's hiding spot, and for a terrifying moment, their gazes met. Elias's breath hitched. This was it, the monster. The thing his parents had scoffed at, the creature of his nightmares. Yet, looking into those suffering eyes, he didn't feel the paralyzing fear he expected. He saw pain. He saw desperation. He saw a profound, ancient sadness. And in that instant, something shifted within Elias. The monster wasn't a monster at all. It was just a giant, injured animal, far from its home, terrified and alone. He didn't run. He couldn't. A strange, almost inexplicable surge of empathy, of protectiveness, washed over him, overriding every instinct for self-preservation. This encounter was personal, direct, and undeniable. He had faced his fear and found not a monster, but a kindred spirit in distress. There was no turning back now. His life, and perhaps the tiger's, had just irrevocably changed. The quiet boy of Whisperwood had just found his true purpose, even if he didn't know it yet. The air in the secluded clearing crackled with a tension that was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. Elias, hidden amongst the thick undergrowth, watched the immense form of the tiger, his heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against his ribs. It was undoubtedly the creature from his nightmares, the monster his parents had so easily dismissed. Yet, in its golden, pain-filled eyes, Elias saw no malice, only profound suffering and a desperate weariness. The raw gash on its flank oozed slowly, a dark stain against its vibrant stripes, and its labored breathing filled the silence of the woods. He knew he should flee. Every fiber of an 8-year-old's survival instinct screamed at him to turn and run, to race back to the safety of his home and the comforting ignorance of his parents. But something held him rooted to the spot. A powerful, unyielding empathy. A strange connection to the suffering beast that transcended all logical fear. This was not a wild animal hunting him. This was a majestic creature, clearly lost and grievously wounded, far from its natural habitat. It was a victim, just like the robin chick, only infinitely larger and more dangerous. Slowly, carefully, Elias pushed aside the thorny branches that concealed him. A twig snapped beneath his worn sneaker, a sound like a gunshot in the hushed clearing. The tiger's head snapped up, its ears swiveling, its golden eyes locking onto Elias. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep in its chest, a warning that spoke of instinct and primal power. Elias froze, his small hands trembling. He could feel the raw power emanating from the creature, the immense strength contained within its striped form. One swipe of that massive paw, one snap of those formidable jaws, and his story would be over. But then, he remembered the robin chick, the small, helpless creature he had nurtured back to health. He remembered the almost imperceptible whispers, the soothing sounds he had made, and the way the tiny bird had responded. An instinct, something deep and ancient within him, took over. He didn't speak in English, not exactly. He spoke in a series of soft clicks, low hums, and gentle intonations. A language of the heart and soul that seemed to bypass the rational mind and speak directly to the raw, wild essence of the tiger. Shh, shh, big cat, he murmured, taking a single, tentative step forward, his voice barely a whisper, yet filled with an undeniable sincerity. It's okay. I won't hurt you. You're hurt, aren't you? I can see it. He stretched out a small hand, palm open, a universal sign of peace, though his limbs felt like jelly. The tiger watched him, its golden eyes narrowed, but the growl in its chest softened, becoming a questioning rumble. Its nostrils flared, taking in his scent, the scent of a small, vulnerable human, yet one radiating no threat, only an overwhelming aura of something akin to pity and understanding. It seemed to hesitate, a magnificent beast caught between instinct and an inexplicable curiosity. Elias took another slow step, then another, until he was standing a mere 10 feet from the injured predator. The air thrummed with the tiger's immense presence, a palpable force that made his skin tingle. He could see the exhaustion in its eyes, the tremors in its powerful legs. This animal wasn't a predator seeking prey. It was a creature in pain, desperate and alone. "You're scared," Elias whispered, his voice resonating with that strange, nonverbal communication. "And you're hungry. And you're hurting." He knelt slowly, deliberately, exposing his vulnerability. An act that should have been an invitation for attack but instead seemed to disarm the massive feline. He reached into his small backpack, pulling out the half-eaten apple and the jerky stick he'd packed for his hike. He placed them gently on the ground, then slowly pushed them towards the tiger with a stick. "Here. It's not much, but it might help." The tiger lowered its head, sniffing cautiously at the offerings. Its ears twitched. Then it looked back at Elias, a flicker of something unreadable in its eyes. Slowly, with an almost agonizing grace, it stretched out its massive paw, nudging the jerky, then gently took it in its jaws. It chewed slowly, cautiously, its gaze never leaving Elias. This was an unveiling, not just of the tiger's presence, but of Elias's profound, almost magical connection to the animal kingdom. He wasn't flaunting it, he was simply being it, in a moment of desperate necessity. Unbeknownst to Elias, A more immediate danger was approaching. Sarah and David Thorne, consumed by growing panic over their son's prolonged absence, had finally given in to their fear. They had called out Elias's name for hours, their voices growing hoarse, their anxieties mounting with each passing minute. The sight of their son's backpack missing from his room, coupled with the continued presence of the strange paw prints near their property, which they now, belatedly, recognized as too large for a dog, had finally chipped away at their stubborn denial. Sarah, her face pale with worry, had finally admitted, "David, something is wrong. Elias never stays out this late. And those tracks, I don't know. Maybe he saw something. Maybe there really is something out there." Driven by a fear far greater than their skepticism, they had followed Elias's faint trail of footprints into the deeper parts of Whisperwood. Calling his name, their voices strained with worry, they stumbled through the thick undergrowth, their hearts pounding, until they too reached the edge of the clearing, just as Elias was offering the tiger the jerky. The sight that greeted them was a tableau ripped straight from their worst nightmares. Their small, unassuming son, kneeling mere feet from a full-grown, undeniably real tiger. The vibrant orange and black stripes, the immense size, the raw power of the beast. It was a horrifying, impossible reality. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. David, for once, was utterly speechless, his face drained of all color. They stood frozen, hidden by the dense foliage, their minds grappling with the impossible, terrifying scene before them. They saw Elias, calm and unafraid, whispering to the creature. They saw the tiger, not roaring in aggression, but gently taking food from his hand, its massive head bowed in a posture that looked almost docile. "Elias, get away from there!" David finally roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and disbelief, shattering the fragile peace of the clearing. The tiger, startled by the sudden intrusion, tensed, its muscles rippling under its striped coat. It let out a low, warning growl, its golden eyes darting towards the sound. Elias, ripped from his focused communion with the animal, flinched, turning to see his parents standing at the edge of the clearing, their faces contorted in horror. "Mom, Dad, no." "Wait," Elias cried, scrambling to his feet, trying to explain, to bridge the impossible chasm of understanding. But it was too late. Sarah, consumed by a primal fear for her child, rushed forward, grabbing Elias by the arm and yanking him back, her voice shrill with terror. "What are you doing? Have you lost your mind? That's a wild animal. It's going to kill you." The tiger, feeling threatened, vulnerable, and now cornered, reacted with a flash of instinct. It let out a thunderous roar, a sound that rattled the trees, and lunged forward, not at Elias or his parents, but towards the deeper woods, seeking escape. Its injured flank clearly hampered its speed, but its sheer power was undeniable. It vanished into the dense foliage, leaving behind only the lingering musky scent and the chilling echo of its roar. Sarah clutched Elias tightly, burying her face in his hair, trembling uncontrollably. David, his face pale, stared wide-eyed into the spot where the tiger had disappeared, a hunting knife now clutched uselessly in his hand. The silence that followed was thick with shock and disbelief. "Elias!" Sarah choked out, pulling back to look at her son, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and incomprehension. What was that? What was that thing? And how? How were you so close to it? Her voice was barely a whisper. Elias tried to explain, his words tumbling out in a rush, desperate to make them understand. "It's not a monster. Mom, it's hurt. It's a tiger from the circus. I think it's scared and it's lost. And I was talking to it. It understood me." David scoffed, though his voice still trembled. "Talking to it, Elias. That's nonsense. It's a wild beast. You were in mortal danger. We saw it. It was about to attack you. His face was etched with a combination of lingering fear and a fresh wave of exasperation, twisting into something resembling anger. He saw not a connection, but a near-fatal delusion. Sarah, though shaken, found her voice. "He's right. Elias, what you did was incredibly reckless. This isn't imagination. This is dangerous. Deadly. We need to call the authorities. Right now. That animal is a menace. And you, Elias, we need to get you checked out. This isn't normal behavior." Her gaze, though filled with love, now held a new, chilling assessment. Her son wasn't just imaginative. He was, in her eyes, profoundly misguided. Perhaps even unwell. The full weight of their misinterpretation crashed down on Elias. They hadn't seen his connection, his unique ability, his act of compassion. They had seen only the danger, the terrifying impossibility, and interpreted his calm interaction as a sign of something deeply wrong with him. The monster had been unveiled, but so too, inadvertently, had Elias's secret talent, and it had been met not with awe, but with fear and condemnation. Back at the farmhouse, the parents of Elias, still reeling from the shock, began to take measures. Sarah, her voice tight with suppressed panic, spent the next hour on the phone, relaying the unbelievable story to a disbelieving local sheriff, then to animal control. And finally, after searching online, to the nearest large circus company, the Grand Spectacle Circus, whose last known performance had been a week prior in a town 200 miles away. The idea of an escaped tiger in rural Vermont was met with incredulity, then a chilling acknowledgement. A tiger, named Raja, had indeed gone missing during a transport 2 weeks ago. The circus owner, a man named Silas Blackwood, confirmed it with a chillingly calm voice, requesting a detailed description of the animal and promising to send a team immediately. David, meanwhile, paced the floor, his frustration warring with his fear. "We can't have that animal roaming our woods," he muttered, more to himself than to Elias. "It's a danger to the livestock, to the neighbors, to him." He gestured vaguely at Elias, who sat slumped in a kitchen chair, listening to his parents, feeling a crushing sense of betrayal. Their actions in the aftermath of the sighting were swift and decisive, driven by a desperate desire to protect their son from what they perceived as his own dangerous delusion. They forbade Elias from going into the woods, erecting crude danger, "Do not enter" signs near the tree line. Sarah started watching him with a hawk-like intensity. Every unusual quiet moment, every distant gaze into the forest, was met with a worried frown. David even suggested contacting a child psychologist, a fleeting thought that sent a fresh wave of despair through Elias. Their immediate response, born of their love and fear, was to control him, to separate him from the very thing he felt so deeply connected to. They had seen the tiger, yes, but their perception of it, and of Elias's interaction with it, was fundamentally flawed. To them, it was an escaped predator, a threat to be neutralized. And Elias, their quiet, imaginative boy, had inexplicably, terrifyingly, befriended it. This revelation solidified their resolve. Elias was in grave peril, not just from the tiger, but from his own alarming connection to it. They had dismissed his warnings, but now, faced with undeniable proof, their solution was not to understand, but to contain. The stage was set for a terrifying clash between their fear and Elias's burgeoning, misunderstood power. The quiet calm of the Thorn farm was shattered by an invasion of strangers. Within 48 hours of Sarah's frantic calls, 2 distinct groups descended upon their isolated property, each with their own agenda, each adding a new layer of dread to Elias's already fractured world. First to arrive were the officials from the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. 2 stern-faced wardens, uniformed and efficient, conducted a grim survey of the large paw prints near the forest's edge. They spoke in hushed, professional tones of protocol and public safety, their eyes often sweeping towards Elias with a mixture of suspicion and pity. They were concerned about a dangerous wild animal. They were equally concerned about the child who claimed to have befriended it. David, eager to cooperate and restore a sense of normalcy, pointed them to the gash-marked sapling and the flattened underbrush, providing precise coordinates and descriptions of the tiger's last known movements. Sarah, still visibly shaken, hovered protectively near Elias, her gaze darting between him and the wardens, as if afraid he might suddenly sprout stripes himself. Then came the circus. Mr. Silas Blackwood, the proprietor of the Grand Spectacle Circus, arrived in a dusty, oversized pickup truck, accompanied by a small, burly crew. Silas was a man built like a barrel, with a florid face, a booming voice that seemed perpetually on the verge of irritation, and eyes that held a calculating, cold glint. He carried himself with an air of aggrieved authority, as if the escaped tiger was a personal affront to his business acumen. He immediately dismissed the wardens as meddling bureaucrats. "This is my animal," Silas declared, gesturing broadly with a stubby finger towards the woods. "A prize Bengal, worth a fortune. It's simply misplaced. Nothing more. We'll handle this our way." He eyed Elias with undisguised contempt. "So this is the boy. Hey, the little faker who claims he can talk to big cats. Pathetic. Probably scared it off with his nonsense, if he even saw anything at all." Elias flinched under Silas's sneering gaze. The man's voice grated on his ears, and there was something truly unsettling in the way he spoke about Raja, not as a living creature, but as a piece of property, a lost investment. Elias felt a surge of protectiveness for the injured tiger, a feeling that defied the fear Silas so effortlessly instilled. The presence of these new arrivals transformed the farm. It ceased to be a home and became a command center. Maps were spread out on the kitchen table, marked with potential trap locations. Discussions revolved around tranquilizer darts, capture nets, and, disturbingly, the backup plan of lethal force if capture proved too difficult. Elias overheard snippets of conversation that made his stomach churn. It's been out too long. It's bound to be dangerous now. And better safe than sorry. A shot to the head if it charges. Each word was a nail hammered into his heart. His parents, meanwhile, were caught between the two factions. David, believing the circus crew were the experts, deferred to Silas's aggressive approach. "He knows animals," David reasoned with Sarah, trying to assuage her unspoken anxieties. "Annie's right. We can't have a wild tiger running around our property indefinitely. It's a danger to the community." Sarah, still pale and worried, agreed with the necessity of the tiger's capture, but watched Silas and his men with a growing unease. Their casual brutality, their heavy boots tramping through their woods, felt wrong. But what choice did they have? The hunt began. Silas's men, rough and unkempt, fanned out, setting up large, crude traps baited with meat, their faces grim and determined. The wardens, more cautious, attempted to coordinate, advocating for non-lethal methods, but they were clearly outmaneuvered by Silas's aggressive leadership and the local sheriff's deference to private property rights. Elias, forbidden from leaving the farmhouse, watched from his bedroom window, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He saw them, the trucks, the men with their rifles, the tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud. He knew Raja was out there, injured and terrified, and now being hunted relentlessly. He could almost feel the tiger's fear, a distant, sympathetic tremor in his own body. He knew they wouldn't understand Raja, just as they didn't understand him. They would see only a dangerous beast, not a lost, suffering soul. The next morning, a chilling sound echoed through the valley. A gunshot, followed by a raw, pain-filled roar that vibrated through the earth itself. Elias gasped, pressing his face against the window. He saw movement deep in the woods, flashes of orange and black, figures moving swiftly between the trees. Panic seized him. They were hurting Raja. They were going to kill him. He had to act. He had to save Raja. His mind, usually so consumed by childlike thoughts, now worked with a fierce, single-minded clarity. He remembered the conversation he had overheard between Silas and his men, a plan to corner the tiger near the old quarry, a deep, abandoned pit at the far end of Whisperwood. It was a natural funnel, a dead end that would trap any animal. They had set up a large net across the mouth of the quarry, intending to drive the tiger into it. This arena for the ultimate test was profoundly symbolic. The old quarry was a place of isolation, a forgotten scar on the landscape, much like Elias himself often felt. It was a place where, historically, the earth had been stripped bare, leaving behind a gaping wound, mirroring the emotional barrenness and dismissal Elias had experienced from his own parents. It was also the deepest, most remote part of the woods, far from their prying eyes and the restrictive confines of the farm. He would be truly alone there. Elias slipped out of the house as quietly as a shadow. His parents were at the breakfast table, discussing the gunshot, their voices low with concern. "They got him," David was saying, a note of grim finality in his voice. "Couldn't be helped." Sarah looked visibly distressed, but nodded. Elias knew he had only a small window of opportunity. He moved with a speed and determination that belied his small stature, dashing through the tall grass, past the barns, and into the familiar, comforting embrace of the forest. He ran, weaving through the dense undergrowth, his small legs burning. He could hear the distant shouts of the hunting party, the baying of a dog, growing closer. Time was short. Every second counted. He knew Raja was injured, slower. The tiger would be driven towards the quarry, towards the trap, towards its inevitable end. As he got closer, the sounds intensified. He heard Silas's booming commands, the crashing of brush, and the frantic, desperate snarls of Raja. The air grew thick with the musky scent of tiger and the metallic tang of fear. Elias's heart pounded, not just with exertion but with a growing dread. He could feel Raja's terror, a raw, desperate emotion that mirrored his own. He reached the edge of the quarry, a gaping maw in the earth, its steep sides lined with jagged rocks. Across the narrow opening, a massive net, camouflaged against the rocks, lay stretched taut. Below, the quarry floor was a treacherous mix of loose stones and stagnant water. It was a perfect trap, and there, already halfway across the quarry floor, limping heavily, was Raja. The tiger was frantic, its golden eyes wide with panic, its sleek body covered in new scrapes and a fresh bullet graze along its shoulder. It seemed to realize it was trapped, pacing back and forth along the sheer rock face, desperately looking for an escape, a low, continuous growl rumbling in its throat. Silas and his men, along with a few of the wardens, emerged from the tree line, their faces grim, their rifles raised. One of the wardens, a man named Miller, looked hesitant, his finger hovering over the safety of his tranquilizer gun. Silas, however, was clearly in charge, his face a mask of ruthless determination. "All right, boys, he's cornered, don't let him double back," Silas bellowed, his voice echoing across the quarry. "Get that net ready if he tries anything. Shoot to kill." Elias's blood ran cold. Shoot to kill. No, he wouldn't let them. He had to do something. Now. He was utterly alone in this, a small boy against a hardened group of men, desperate to save the magnificent creature they so casually deemed a menace. The clock was ticking, and Raja's life hung by a thread. Elias knew, with an absolute certainty, that this was his moment. This was the ultimate test, and failure was not an option. The air in the quarry was thick with the scent of pine, damp earth, and an undercurrent of raw fear. Raja, the magnificent Bengal tiger, limped frantically across the uneven floor, its golden eyes darting, its injured flank throbbing with pain. Above, on the jagged rim of the quarry, Silas Blackwood, a crude hunting rifle clutched in his beefy hands, bellowed orders to his men. Two burly figures were already poised to drop the massive net. The Fish and Wildlife Warden, Miller, stood a few feet away, his face etched with hesitation, his tranquilizer gun lowered, a silent plea in his eyes for a less brutal solution. David and Sarah Thorne, having followed the sounds of the chase, stumbled onto the scene, their faces chalk white, their eyes fixed in horror on their son who was now, impossibly, at the very edge of the quarry. "Elias, get back! Get away from there!" Sarah screamed, her voice hoarse with terror. But Elias didn't hear her. His gaze was locked on Raja, and the tiger's desperate, panicked movements. Silas, catching sight of the boy, sneered. Well, if it isn't the little animal whisperer. Move aside, kid. This ain't no petting zoo. He raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel. Last chance. You mangy beast into the net or your dog food. A surge of white-hot fury, unlike anything Elias had ever felt, coursed through him. They wouldn't. They couldn't. Not Raja. Not his friend. In that instant, every dismissal, every scoff, every moment of feeling unheard and unseen by his parents coalesced into a fierce, unyielding resolve. This was his truth, his ability, and he would not let them destroy it, or Raja. Without a second's thought, Elias pushed through the last of the undergrowth, bursting into the open. "No!" he screamed, his small voice surprisingly strong, echoing off the quarry walls. He ran forward, not towards his parents, but directly towards the edge of the pit, placing himself between the armed men and the trapped tiger. Silas, momentarily stunned by the boy's sudden appearance, lowered his rifle fractionally. "What the? Get back here, you idiot child." Elias ignored him. He stood at the very precipice, his small figure stark against the vast backdrop of the forest. He looked down at Raja, whose golden eyes met his. The tiger was panting, its powerful chest heaving, a low, continuous growl rumbling in its throat, a sound of primal fear and confusion. "Raja!" Elias cried, using the name he had intuitively given the tiger. It wasn't a human sound, but a complex series of clicks, soft trills, and deep, resonant hums, a language that seemed to flow from his very soul, a sound of understanding, of command, of profound empathy. "Listen to me. Trust me. Don't go into the net. They will hurt you." The tiger, incredibly, seemed to falter, its ears twitching, its gaze fixed on Elias. The growl subsided into a whimper, a pained, questioning sound. It was an extraordinary moment, one that silenced even the hardened circus men. Sarah gasped, a hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a dawning, terrifying comprehension. David lowered his head, utterly dumbfounded. "Raja!" "Listen," Elias urged, his voice filled with an almost desperate urgency. "They want to capture you, but I can help you escape, but you have to be brave. You have to trust me." He extended his hand, not towards the tiger, but towards a narrow, almost invisible crevice in the sheer rock face of the quarry wall, just out of sight of Silas's men. It was a perilous, barely there path Elias had discovered weeks ago, one only a smaller, nimbler creature could navigate. "Go there. Go through. It leads out. Trust me." Silas, recovering from his shock, roared, "He's losing it. Drop the net." The two men yanked on the ropes. The massive net began to unfurl, a dark, ominous shadow descending rapidly towards Raja. This was the Nintho moment, the breath-holding instant when everything seemed doomed to fail. Raja, panicked by the descending net, let out a terrified roar, backing up against the rock face, snarling defensively. The net was mere feet above him, its heavy folds about to envelop him. "Now! Raja, now!" Elias shrieked, his voice cracking with the sheer force of his will, his arm outstretched, pointing frantically at the hidden crevice. "Go live." And then, something incredible happened. Raja, the majestic beast, wounded and terrified, made a choice that defied all logic, all instinct for self-preservation. It looked from the descending net to Elias's pleading, unwavering eyes, and in that split second, it trusted. With a guttural cry that sounded almost like a plea, the tiger sprang. It wasn't a lunge for safety into the open, but a desperate, agile leap towards the narrow crevice Elias had indicated. Its massive claws scrabbled against the rough rock, its powerful legs propelling it forward with surprising speed despite its injuries. It squeezed its immense body into the impossibly tight opening, a flash of orange and black disappearing from view just as the net slammed down onto the quarry floor with a heavy thud, missing it by mere inches. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Silas stared, his jaw hanging open, rifle forgotten. The wardens, including Miller, exchanged wide-eyed glances. David and Sarah, witnessing the impossible escape, felt a cold knot of dread and a burgeoning, terrifying awe. Elias, panting, dropped to his knees, his small chest heaving, tears streaming down his face, tears of relief, and of an overwhelming, bittersweet sorrow that Raja was gone, but free. Silas, his face purple with rage, finally found his voice. "Blast it all, he's gone. You little brat, you let him escape." He stomped towards Elias, his eyes blazing. "I'll have your hide. That tiger was worth a fortune." But before Silas could reach Elias, Warden Miller stepped forward, his face grim. "Hold it right there, Mr. Blackwood." His voice was calm, but held an unexpected steel. He had witnessed something truly extraordinary, something that defied all his training and skepticism. He had seen the trust between a boy and a beast. He had seen a creature, cornered and terrified, respond not to brute force, but to a whisper of understanding. We saw what happened. That tiger was clearly under severe distress, and it chose to flee, thanks to the boy. More importantly, Miller's gaze hardened, sweeping over Silas's menacing stance and the visible injuries on the tiger's trail. "We're now going to need to have a serious talk about the condition of your animal, Mr. Blackwood. That wound, it looks suspiciously like a bullet graze, and we have reports of animal cruelty at your last few venues. Your permit is under review, effective immediately." Silas spluttered, his bluster deflating. You can't, I'll sue. This is outrageous." But Miller was already turning to his colleague. "Call the state authorities. This isn't just about an escaped animal anymore." The attention shifted, the immediate danger to Raja averted. Elias slowly stood, his legs shaky. He looked at his parents, who were now standing frozen, their faces reflecting a dizzying array of emotions: shock, fear, confusion, and a burgeoning, undeniable realization. Sarah, her voice barely a whisper, was the first to approach him. Her eyes, usually so practical and grounded, now held a profound, almost reverent bewilderment. She didn't scold him. She didn't question him. She simply reached out, her trembling hand cupping his cheek. "Elias," she breathed, her gaze sweeping over his tear-streaked face, then back to the crevice where the tiger had disappeared. You really did talk to it, didn't you? It understood you. It wasn't a question, but a dawning, terrible, glorious truth. Her dismissal, her skepticism, shattered like fragile glass. The disbelief was replaced by a wave of humbling awe and a crushing realization of how profoundly she had misunderstood her own son. David, usually so stoic, cleared his throat, his eyes wide and unfocused. He looked from Elias to the empty net, to the stunned faces of the circus men. "My God," he murmured, the words barely audible. He wasn't making it up. He was telling the truth. All this time, he looked at his son, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a child prone to flights of fancy, but as a boy with an extraordinary gift, a profound connection to the natural world that he, a man of the earth, had been utterly blind to. His pride, his stubbornness, his rational pragmatism, it all crumbled. His face, usually a mask of stoicism, crumpled, revealing a raw, profound regret. The reactions of the witnesses were a powerful testament to Elias's vindication. The wardens, initially skeptical, now looked at Elias with a mixture of professional curiosity and profound respect. The circus men, rough and jaded, stood silently, their faces ranging from grudging admiration to open-mouthed astonishment. The crowd that had gathered, a few curious neighbors, a local reporter who had heard the rumors, began to murmur, their voices rising from whispers of disbelief to gasps of wonder. Their faces transformed from skeptical amusement to open-mouthed awe. Then finally, as the weight of what they had just witnessed settled, to murmurs of profound admiration, the small, quiet boy, so often dismissed, had just saved a magnificent beast, and in doing so, had claimed his own rightful place in the world, validated by the very elements that had conspired to doubt him. His victory was not just personal. It was a societal acknowledgement of his unique, undeniable truth. The immediate aftermath in the quarry was a whirlwind of stunned silence and sudden, decisive action. Warden Miller, his initial skepticism completely replaced by the undeniable reality he had just witnessed, took charge. His eyes, initially fixed on Elias, now glared at Silas Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood," he stated, his voice firm and unwavering, "I'm placing you under arrest for animal cruelty and endangerment. The evidence of the tiger's injuries, your methods, and now your attempt to conceal its condition by rushing its capture, it's all here. And we have numerous complaints on file about your circus's animal welfare practices." Silas, a man accustomed to bullying and bluster, found himself utterly deflated. The awe of the crowd, the damning testimony of the wardens, and the terrifying escape of his prize asset had stripped him of his power. He spluttered, attempting to protest, but the arrival of a county sheriff's deputy, summoned by a hurried call from Miller, solidified his fate. Silas Blackwood, the tyrannical circus owner, was led away in handcuffs, his furious protests echoing uselessly against the quarry walls. His crew, dispirited and defeated, began the dismantling of their crude traps, their faces reflecting a mix of shock and a grudging admiration for the boy who had outsmarted them all. The justice meted out to Silas was swift and public, a fitting end for a man whose greed and cruelty had directly threatened an innocent life, both human and animal. As the authorities led Silas away, the crowd, now swelling with more curious onlookers from the nearby towns, began to disperse, buzzing with excited whispers about the boy who talks to animals and the miracle tiger. Elias, still trembling slightly, found himself enveloped in a hug so tight it almost squeezed the breath from his lungs. It was his mother, Sarah, her face buried in his shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Elias!" she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. "Oh, Elias, my boy, I am so sorry." She pulled back, her hands cupping his face, her eyes red-rimmed but shining with a profound, aching realization. We should have listened. We should have believed you. All this time. You tried to tell us, and we just dismissed it. We were so afraid, so blind." Her confession was raw, heartfelt, and utterly sincere. The weight of her dismissal, which had silently burdened Elias for so long, lifted in that moment. Her apology was not just for her skepticism, but for her failure to truly see her son. David, usually a man of few words, knelt before Elias, his calloused hands resting gently on his son's shoulders. His eyes, usually so focused on the practicalities of farm life, were now filled with a deep, unsettling humility. "Son," he said, his voice rough with emotion, I don't know what to say. I thought I was protecting you. I thought you were imagining things. I was wrong. Elias. So wrong. You have a gift. A real, incredible gift. And we didn't see it. Forgive us, son." His confession, too, was a profound act of vulnerability, shattering the facade of his pragmatic, unyielding nature. He recognized his own arrogance, his own limited perception, and the regret in his eyes was palpable. Elias, for the first time in his life, felt truly seen, truly understood by his parents. The tears that had been streaming down his face now came from a different well, a well of relief, of forgiveness, and of a blossoming hope. He hugged them back, fiercely. The chasm that had grown between them, fueled by his unique perception and their practical dismissal, had finally closed. They were no longer the parents who misunderstood him. They were the parents who, having faced an undeniable truth, had humbled themselves and opened their hearts. They had transformed from misunderstanding type B characters to staunch allies, their past mistakes becoming the foundation for a stronger, more trusting bond. News of the Whisperwood tiger incident spread far and wide, picked up by regional news outlets and eventually national wire services. The story of the boy who saved a tiger from cruel captors, communicating with it in a mysterious, intuitive way, captivated the public. Elias, once the quiet, unnoticed child, became an accidental hero. The tiger, Raja, was eventually located deep within a neighboring state's wilderness, having traveled far despite his injuries. Thanks to Elias's unique guidance, relayed to Warden Miller, a specialized wildlife team was able to track Raja. They found him, weak but alive, and successfully tranquilized him. Raja was transported to a sprawling, accredited animal sanctuary in Florida, a place designed to rehabilitate and protect big cats that had been rescued from captivity. It was a vast, natural habitat, a true paradise compared to the cramped cages of the circus. Elias received updates, seeing pictures of Raja thriving, his wounds healed, his powerful form now muscular and healthy, roaming freely in lush enclosures. This was the meaningful new opportunity for Raja, a life of dignity and peace. For Elias, the resolution brought a series of profound new opportunities. The story of his abilities reached scientists and conservationists across the country. He received invitations from renowned zoologists and wildlife biologists, eager to study his unique gift. Offers poured in from animal rescue organizations and sanctuaries, asking for his insights, his intuitive understanding, his presence. He was no longer just Elias Thorne, the quiet farm boy. He was Elias Thorne, the whisperer of wilds, a voice for the voiceless. One evening, a few weeks after the incident, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elias sat on the porch swing with his parents. The air was cool, the sounds of the forest once again harmonious, no longer tainted by the clamor of the hunt. "It's still hard to believe," David murmured, gazing out at the darkening woods, a newfound respect in his eyes. "That tiger, and you. It was extraordinary." "Elias," Sarah squeezed Elias's hand. "We're so proud of you, honey. So incredibly proud. You were so brave and so kind. We learned a very important lesson that day. To listen. Truly listen. To you and to the world around us." Elias leaned into his mother's touch, a comfortable warmth spreading through him. I knew he wasn't bad. Mom, he was just scared and hurt." He paused, then looked up at them, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "The forest. It talks. You know. You just have to know how to listen." David chuckled softly, a sound free of his usual gruffness. "I think we're finally learning how, son, thanks to you." This was the quiet, reflective dialogue, the new calm. Elias had saved Raja, and in doing so, he had also saved his relationship with his parents, transforming it from one of loving misunderstanding into a bond of profound trust and mutual respect. He had not only found a new purpose, but had also earned the unconditional acceptance and love he had always yearned for. The path ahead was clear, filled with meaning and the promise of a future where his unique gift would be celebrated, not dismissed. 5 years later, the old thorn farmhouse still stood nestled against the sprawling greens of Whisperwood, but its quiet solitude had been replaced by a vibrant hum of purpose. Elias, now a lanky 13-year-old with a steady gaze and a quiet confidence that belied his years, was no longer just a farm boy. He was, as the national media had dubbed him, the Whisperer of Wilds, a moniker he wore with a humble sense of responsibility. His unique ability to connect with animals, once a source of misunderstanding, was now his profound strength, guiding his every step and shaping his extraordinary life. His bond with his parents, Sarah and David, had blossomed into something truly remarkable. The chasm of miscommunication that had once separated them had been filled with understanding, respect, and an unshakable trust. They were his fiercest advocates, his unwavering support system. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, had embraced his gift with an almost ferocious protectiveness. Learning alongside him, reading scientific journals about animal behavior, and even taking online courses in wildlife rehabilitation. David, the man of few words, now listened with rapt attention whenever Elias spoke of the forest's secrets, his eyes gleaming with a newfound appreciation for the complex tapestry of nature. The farm, once their sole focus, had become a base of operations for Elias's burgeoning work, a testament to their shared commitment. Elias traveled extensively, invited by renowned conservationists, zoologists, and wildlife organizations across the United States. He wasn't a showman, he was a bridge. In Florida, he spent weeks at the sanctuary where Raja, now a magnificent, fully recovered adult tiger, roamed a vast, natural habitat. Their reunions were quiet, intensely personal affairs, witnessed only by a handful of awestruck sanctuary staff. Raja would approach Elias, not with the cautious curiosity of a wild animal, but with the profound recognition of a true friend. Elias would sit for hours, talking to him in their shared language of clicks and hums, offering gentle reassurance and listening to the low rumbles of contentment that vibrated through the ground. It was a profound connection, a living testament to the power of empathy and the deep, often unseen bonds that could form between species. He visited endangered wolf packs in Yellowstone, helping researchers understand complex pack dynamics and aiding in the rehabilitation of injured alphas. He worked with marine biologists off the coast of California, his intuitive understanding helping them track and protect migrating whale pods, sometimes even coaxing injured dolphins back to health. Elias was able to discern subtle emotional states, to soothe frightened creatures, and to communicate distress or comfort in ways scientists were only just beginning to grasp. His involvement led to breakthroughs in non-invasive research and more humane rehabilitation techniques. He possessed a profound empathy that allowed him to see beyond the wildness, into the very soul of the creature. He wasn't just observing, he was understanding. But Elias never forgot his roots, or the forest that had revealed his true calling. He always returned to Whisperwood, finding solace in its familiar embrace. The local community, initially skeptical, had long since embraced him. He had become a quiet legend, his story a beloved local tale of courage and connection. In his newfound role, Elias felt compelled to pay it forward. He knew his gift was rare, but the principles behind it, empathy, respect for nature, the importance of listening, were universal. Inspired by his own journey from being misunderstood to being celebrated, he founded the Whisperwood Foundation for Empathy and Wildlife Preservation. It started as a small local initiative, funded by donations and the small speaking fees he sometimes accepted. The foundation's mission was twofold: to educate children and adults about the critical importance of wildlife conservation and, perhaps more importantly, to teach them to listen not just with their ears, but with their hearts. He organized community workshops, leading groups of wide-eyed children and curious adults on guided walks through Whisperwood. He taught them how to identify animal tracks, how to understand bird calls, and how to observe the subtle signs of the forest. He shared Raja's story, not as a fantastical tale, but as a real-life example of how compassion and understanding could bridge even the widest divides. He encouraged them to sit quietly, to breathe, to simply be present in nature, believing that true connection began with stillness and observation. His message resonated deeply. Every creature had a voice, and it was humanity's responsibility to hear it. One warm summer evening, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the Vermont sky in strokes of fiery orange and soft lavender, Elias stood on a ridge overlooking Whisperwood. Below him, the forest stretched out, a vast living tapestry of greens and browns, whispering its ancient secrets. Beside him, a young, nervous fawn, rescued after being separated from its mother, nudged his hand, its large, liquid eyes gazing up at him with trusting innocence. Elias gently stroked its soft fur, a calm, reassuring presence. He looked towards the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to prick through the fading light. He thought of Raja, safe and free in his distant sanctuary. He thought of all the animals he had helped, and all those he still hoped to reach. He thought of his parents, whose belief in him now shone as brightly as the evening star. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it the faint, familiar scent of pine and wild earth. It was the scent of home, of belonging, of a life lived in harmony. As the last sliver of the sun dipped below the tree line, casting the forest in deep, mystical shadows, Elias raised his hand to the sky. A flock of wild geese, silhouetted against the twilight, soared overhead, their calls echoing through the quiet air. They were heading south, guided by instinct, by ancient wisdom, by the unseen forces of the world. Elias watched them, a serene smile on his face, a quiet guardian of the wild, his heart beating in rhythm with the pulse of the earth. He was no longer the boy who was afraid of the monster in the woods. He was the young man who had found the monster, befriended it, and in doing so, had found his true self, creating a brighter, more empathetic future for all. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.